Distinguished speakers and friends, it is with great pleasure that I'm speaking to you today on the occasion of the 4th Sustainability Forum, although also with much regret that I cannot be with you in person because of the continued restrictions imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Between the last Sustainability Forum in 2019 and this 4th forum in 2021, the world has become a very different place. The COVID-19 pandemic has severely impacted not only public health, but also the world of work. According to ILO estimates, some 8.8% of global working hours were lost in 2020 compared to the fourth quarter of 2019. This is equivalent to 255 million full-time jobs worldwide, 4 times greater than during the global financial crisis in 2009. The COVID pandemic has posed serious challenges for multinational as well as small and medium-sized enterprises because of severe disruptions in global supply and value chains. The Asia and the Pacific region was the first region to experience the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on globalized production. According to recent ILO research, foreign direct investment into and out of the region decreased by 36% in 2020 compared to 2019. Factory closures, falling customer demand, and supply chain bottlenecks continue to have ripple effects that spread across entire supply chains. These disruptions have resulted in decent work deficits, especially with regards to wages, security of employment, occupational safety and health, and freedom of association and collective bargaining. Vulnerable groups such as women, young people, and migrant workers have been hit the hardest. The current pandemic has greatly exacerbated existing inequalities within and between countries. This includes increased challenges to achieve gender equality. The progress we have made over the past decades on gender equality risks serious setbacks for the women working in the front lines of the pandemic as workers in healthcare and essential services, having to cope at the same time with unpaid care work, homeschooling, and so on. Many women have lost their jobs or had to choose between work and caring for the family in these difficult times, often facing increased domestic violence. As we work out of the crisis, building back better towards a better normal, it is critical that gender equality is at the heart of our efforts. Measures to restore business operations and foster economic recovery should adopt a human-centered approach that leaves no one behind. 2021 is an important year for Japan, with a great opportunity to bring about change in preconceived ideas about gender roles and gender equality. The Olympic and Paralympic Games are all about celebrating diversity and inclusion, creating a platform for athletes, trainers, and support staff of different cultures, ages, social backgrounds to come together in friendly global competitions on the basis of their athletic abilities and achievements. These are values that should be celebrated and encouraged every day, including in businesses. Business has a key role to play in promoting equality, diversity, and inclusion. By adopting inclusive and responsible business practices, the workplace becomes a strategic entry point for equal opportunities. Such practices may serve as a catalyst to undo pervasive social issues such as gender stereotyping, social stigma, and unconscious bias. Equality of treatment and opportunity is a universal human right and one of the ILO's 4 fundamental principles and rights at work. It is also a core element of several international labor standards adopted through tripartite consensus by governments, employers, and workers in the ILO. The Tokyo 2020 Sustainability Sourcing Code explicitly prohibits suppliers from engaging in any forms of discrimination and harassment, and requires respect of women's rights, respect for persons with disabilities, and fair treatment of foreign workers, amongst others. The Sustainability Sourcing Code illustrates the evolving landscape surrounding business and human rights. This year, 2021, also marks the 10th anniversary of the endorsement of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. While these guiding principles have led many businesses to reflect on the impacts of their operations in terms of upholding human rights in their operations, effective implementation remains a challenge for many companies, especially in countries where there are governance gaps. In this regard, there is a notable shift in certain parts of the world towards more robust and even binding legal measures to ensure respect for human rights in business operations across global supply chains. Japanese companies exporting to global markets, particularly to Europe, may face specific requirements as part of mandatory due diligence legislation. Sustainable development chapters and labor provisions in trade and investment agreements also spell out expectations on upholding labor standards and providing decent working conditions. The various editions of the Sustainability Forum have facilitated dialogues among various stakeholders in Japan and facilitated the sharing of experiences on promoting more and better jobs and responsible supply chains. This is an important contribution to the Tokyo 2020 Games becoming a blueprint for humanity and fair play. We should highlight the outcomes of the ILO Tokyo 2020 partnership as well. I recommend all participants in the forum today to review the handbook on international labor standards and sustainable sourcing towards the realization of decent work through the Tokyo 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games. I also would like to recommend the collection of practices, fair play practices of Tokyo 2020 Games partner companies to promote decent work as a source of inspiration. All these examples illustrate how the recommendations of the ILO's tripartite declaration of principles concerning multinational enterprises and social policy, the M&E declaration, can be put in practice, including through a due diligence process. In addition, I also invite you to visit the website of the ILO Tokyo office, where you will find many ILO tools for enterprises in Japanese. I also would like to recall that in October 2020, the government of Japan launched its National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. It includes the government's expectation for Japanese enterprises to respect internationally recognized human rights and the principles and rights expressed in the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work. This encompasses freedom of association and collective bargaining, non-discrimination in employment and occupation, the elimination of child labor, and the elimination of forced labor. The National Action Plan also expects companies to conduct human rights due diligence, to engage in meaningful dialogue with relevant stakeholders, including those that are part of global supply chains, and to resolve issues through effective grievance mechanisms. Japanese stakeholders have been actively involved in the development of the National Action Plan in Japan. And I am pleased to highlight the efforts of the ILO Tokyo office in facilitating social dialogue among stakeholders, resulting in a joint submission to the government. The National Action Plan will give an important impetus to socially responsible labor practices. Based on the distinct but complementary responsibilities outlined in the National Action Plan and in the ILO M&E Declaration, the government of Japan and Japanese businesses have an important role to play in promoting decent work within and outside of Japan. We particularly welcome the Japanese government's commitment to promote decent work, reinforce measures against harassment, protect and respect the rights of workers, including foreign workers and technical intern trainees, advance women's empowerment, as well as the government's effort to pursue ratification of the ILO core conventions. And we welcome the government's commitment to promote the ILO M&E Declaration, as well as its continued support to ILO's development cooperation programs. In the panel today, 2 companies will share the measures and initiatives they have taken to further decent work in their business operations. We will then hear from ILO governing body members from both employers and workers' organizations, who will surely provide key elements for socially responsible labor practices from the perspective of social partners. Let me conclude by stating that the ILO partnership with Tokyo 2020 Olympic Committee has been a great opportunity to raise awareness on how Japanese companies, through their operations as sponsors and suppliers to the Games, can contribute to decent work. This presents an enormous opportunity for a shift towards fostering a culture of responsible business in Japan, well beyond the conclusion of the Olympic Games in summer. This is a movement that has been put in motion and that is now supported by the National Action Plan and commitments by employers and workers' organizations. This is part of the legacy of Tokyo 2020 and an example to follow by others. My best wishes to all of you.